Greetings. I am so happy to be with all of you today to share several aspects of my musical journey. I've been playing the sarod for 50 years now, and I thought it would be nice to begin this presentation with a very short rendition of the traditional raga, Sindhi Bhairavi. My music journey began very early in my childhood with singing. I was almost always singing. Later, I started playing guitar, and as soon as I learned 3 or 4 chords, I began making up songs. Like many of my contemporaries, I went on to play with several rock and roll groups in high school, and by the time I started university, I was composing more serious guitar pieces. At the same time, I felt that I was reaching the limits of what I could achieve on my own. One day, I saw a poster on the campus announcing that there would be a concert of Indian classical music the next day by Ustad Ali Akbar Khan and his ensemble. It aroused my curiosity, and I went to the concert. I was fascinated and very moved. I felt as if the maestro could go anywhere with his melodies, but at the same time, his music seemed to have very deep roots. After the concert, he announced that he had recently opened a college in California where anyone could come and study this music. The following summer, 1972, I traveled to California and began studying at the Ali Akbar College. It was exciting, and I felt very strongly that I had finally found the music style that would give me the perfect balance between a rigorous tradition and the freedom to continue improvising and composing. Although the instruments were exotic and it was difficult to sit on the floor for long periods of time, musically, I felt very much at home at the Ali Akbar College. The maestro, who we addressed as Khansab, taught us 4 hours a day, 5 days per week. First was singing class for 2 hours, followed by instrumental. He followed the traditional teaching method of oral tradition. He would sing or play a phrase, and we had to just pick it up by listening and then repeat it. That first summer, I was also lucky enough to have my first Indian rhythm lessons with the then very young maestro, Ustad Zakir Hussain. I couldn't have even imagined that 15 years later, I would have the honor of performing with Zakir Ji in numerous concerts and recordings in the US, Europe, and India. Khansab's classroom was filled with a wonderful mixture of traditional Indian teaching techniques and innovation. Although some of the compositions that he taught us had been composed by his father and his father's teachers, many he simply composed on the spot. For those of us who had a passion for improvisation and composition, there could be no better way to learn. We tried to learn not only the musical phrases, but also tried to understand the way in which he was composing. If we weren't quick enough to learn a new line as he created it, he would call us inattentive or sleepy. And if we jumped in too quickly before he finished a line, he would scold us for spoiling his music phrases. It was the most extraordinary way of learning music that I had ever experienced. And as soon as we understood one line, he would go on to the next. This went on for 37 years until he passed away at the age of 87. And now, 50 years later, I feel that I'm still learning from him every day. I am so grateful for the support and guidance that I received from Ustad Ali Akbar Khan and tabla maestro Pandit Swapan Chaudhary. In 1985, they made it possible for me to open the Ali Akbar College of Music in Switzerland, and this institute has grown to become one of the most important centers for studying Indian classical music outside of India. Kansab was like a second father to me, and Swapanda like an elder brother. Both gave me their love and guidance, and at one point, Kansab invited me to perform with him. Before the first time, in Amsterdam, he asked Swapanda, "I'm thinking to have Ken perform with me during the second half of the concert. Do you think he's ready?" Swapanda replied, "Who will ever be ready to perform with you, Kansab?" "Of course, he is as ready as anyone could be. Give him a chance." During the first half of the concert, I was backstage, listening and getting very nervous. When the second half of the concert began, Kansab introduced me, telling the audience how it was part of the Indian tradition for a guru to sometimes bring the disciple onto the stage to assist him. Then he said, "This is Ken's first time playing with me. I'm sure you can understand how he feels, so please give him your support." There was a big applause, and we began. My attention was completely on him, listening to every phrase, knowing that at any moment he could turn to me and give me a nod to play something. There hadn't been any rehearsals. My entire training with him had been a rehearsal for this. I was doing pretty well, and then during the last section, when the intensity and speed were increasing to a climax, suddenly one of Kansab's strings broke. There was an audible gasp in the audience. Kansab turned to me, smiled, and nodded for me to continue. I took a deep breath and went on playing at this high speed for 5 long minutes. And when his string was changed, he jumped back in with the audience roaring in applause. It seemed I had passed the test. After the concert, he said to me, "Very good. You see, it's easy." However, even with all the love and guidance, sometimes it was not so easy with the guru. As we became closer, Kansab's expectations of me also grew, and if I slipped up in any way, he didn't hesitate to give me a verbal beating. Even if I thought that I was just doing what he had requested, he would say, "It doesn't matter what I say. You have to know what I want." This was an entirely different kind of lesson, but just as important as the ragas and the rhythms. This year, 2022, we celebrate the 100th centenary year of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan, one of the greatest musicians in the history of Indian music. Here he is. My interest in the traditions of Western classical music also grew, and I transitioned from the guitar to the medieval lute, a pear-shaped plucked instrument that looks somewhat like a mandolin. I was immediately struck by the similarities between European medieval music and Indian classical music. And during the next 40 years, as a professor at the Music Conservatory of Basel, Switzerland, I was able to develop a pedagogy for teaching improvisation techniques to Western music students using many of the traditional practices that I had learned from Indian music. In addition to the music itself, some of the important teaching tools that Maestro Khan also used in the classroom were figures of speech, like metaphors and analogies and similes. For him, music had a connection with many aspects of life, and it was enlightening for us to see his grand view of music, beyond the notes and rhythms. Sometimes he would use the analogy of an architect, building up a raga from the foundation to the first and then upper floors. Then he would critique our improvisations. What are you doing? Trying to build the second floor before the first floor is complete? Your house will fall down. Other times, he would create a beautiful image. You have to show the microtones of this note like the soft undulations of the water on a peaceful lake, in constant but subtle motion. Of course, during the long years of my study, I sometimes had doubts and difficulties along the way. No one was really encouraging me to devote myself to learning Indian classical music. On the contrary, some of my friends and even family members thought it was not a serious pursuit and questioned how a Westerner like me would ever be able to earn a living playing Indian music. But I remember, even early in my studies, during my first trip to Europe in 1973, one evening, watching the sun set on a hillside near Barcelona and wondering whether I should continue learning the sarod, a voice came from inside and said, "Go for it, or you will never forgive yourself for not trying." That gave me courage, and I needed it. Even after a number of years performing and getting very good reviews from both listeners and the press, I continued to experience discrimination. Not so much in India, but more in the West, as there was skepticism about whether a non-Indian could or even should perform Indian music. This was very hurtful and frustrating for me. But one of India's leading music critics, Mohan Nadkarni, assured me, "Ken, don't worry about this. The real Indian music connoisseurs listen with their ears open and their eyes shut." For most of my life, I was very happy to be a player of music and let the craftsmen take care of my instruments. But there came a time when I felt the need to get more involved in innovations and inventions to improve the Indian traditional instruments. In so doing, I realized that sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. When I first began concertizing in India, it was normal for the organizer to provide both a tanpura and someone to play it. But after several years, it became more and more difficult to arrange this. Finally, I was shocked when before a concert, I asked for the tanpura and the organizer brought out an electronic box that spewed a horrible digital imitation of a tanpura. These gadgets were becoming more and more popular in India, and I just couldn't understand how musicians could substitute the exquisite and rich sound of a real tanpura with this electronic noise. I felt I had to do something about this. Then I thought, with only about 5 strings that needed to be plucked in the same order, same intensity, same rhythm for the entirety of a performance, why couldn't there be a mechanical device that could play a tanpura? So I started to imagine, how could this be done? And then one morning, when I approached the tanpura, I opened my hand, suspended it over the tanpura, and imagined a disc rotating slowly above the strings, with plectrums attached to it, each one plucking the strings of the tanpura as the disc rotated, powered by a quiet motor that would be mounted above it. When I presented this idea to one friend, who is an expert in repairing Indian instruments, he said, "Ken, I think you're off your rocker. It definitely won't work, and if it does, I'll eat my hat." undaunted, I went to another craftsman, this one much younger and fascinated by new challenges. And he thought it could be done. It took time to engineer and build, and there were numerous technical challenges, but we were thrilled when finally it was successful. In the end, Shanti is a wonderful example of the blending of Indian tradition, Swiss craftsmanship, and American ingenuity. By the way, the name Shanti came to me when I was first watching the robot in action. It was so peaceful that Shanti seemed to be the perfect name. Would you like to see Shanti? So you see the tanpura lying on its back. The disc is moving slowly, and there are white plectrums made of felt, piano felt, that are plucking each one of the 6 strings, one after another, and these 6 plectrums are then cycling around through the rotation. It's being played exactly as a tanpura should be played, and it will play until we shut it off, which will be now. Meanwhile, I had another instrument problem. My old sarod did not have the necessary resonance to handle the nuances that I was trying to express. And my new sarod was so loud and brash sounding that I sometimes had to use earplugs just to prevent getting a headache. It got to the point where I didn't even want to practice anymore. I had to find a solution, and it thrust me into the fascinating world of music acoustics, instrument woods, and design engineering. Luckily, the brass resonator that most sarods are equipped with is simply attached to the sarod like a light bulb to a socket. It can be easily unscrewed. Once I removed it, the tinny, annoying buzzing disappeared, and then I wondered, couldn't I just make a better sounding resonator out of wood and then screw it onto the sarod? I did some research and began trying different woods, first alone, then in combinations. Each one produced a different quality of tone. I also began to think about speaker cabinets, which are sometimes made of 3 separate sized speakers, each one responsible for a specific frequency range, like bass, mid-range, and treble. Then I wondered why were we restricting ourselves to the original size of the brass resonator. As expected, a larger resonator produced a bigger sound. But if it got too big, I saw that it would block the left hand from playing some of the notes on the sarod. So I thought, instead of putting a hole in the back like all the other resonators, why don't we put the hole on the side in a scallop shape that would allow my left hand access to the notes? Although my advisors said that it wouldn't work, I insisted that we try it. So we made this oversized resonator, and it sounds fantastic. So here you see the original brass bell of the sarod, hardly a resonator, more of an ornamental addition, I would think. And then the first resonator made of wood with the hole in the back. This is pear wood. And then I experimented with a mixture of pear and cedar, which produced a different sound. And finally, we went to a bigger resonator, which has the scallop taken out of it, made of 3 woods, this one here too, ebony, and inside, maybe you can see, or maybe you can't, but there's a bronze tweeter, which brings some of the higher frequencies into play. It's fascinating work. You can see more photos on my website if you're interested. Meanwhile, in 2018, I suffered a severe lower back disc injury, due in large part to 45 years of playing the sarod sitting in an ergonomically poor position. I was left with the choice: stop playing or find a better way to sit. Although I was in constant pain, depressed, and worried that I may never be able to play again, one of my best friends said, "Don't worry, Ken, you'll figure out something just like your other inventions." And I did. The result? A 3-component system of custom-designed cushions that saved my back and now allow me to play the sarod pain-free for the first time in my life. My only question, or rather complaint, is why didn't I think of this 50 years ago? So whether it's learning music and being creative and composing music, or working with instruments to find better solutions, a common theme that is involved with all of these disciplines is imagination. Imagination to just be able to believe and have a preconception of what might be possible, either with a musical phrase or a different kind of wood. This helped me along and is part of all disciplines. So I thought I would just spend a moment with a quote about imagination. Who was the famous scientist who said, "Imagination is the highest form of research. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination circles the world." I'll give you a hint. He also said, "If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I get most of my enjoyment out of music." You're right, Albert Einstein. And I guess there are more than a few of us who are relieved that Einstein stayed with physics rather than becoming a musician. One last, very interesting chain of comparisons. Listen closely. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is not truth. Truth is not wisdom. Wisdom is not beauty. Beauty is not love. Love is not music. Music is the best. This is a quote from Frank Zappa, composer, social satirist, rock and roll guitarist, and leader of the band The Mothers of Invention, and definitely a great thinker about music. Many years ago, when I recited this quote to my guru, Ali Akbar Khan Sahib, he listened intensively and immediately responded, "Yes, that's great. Please say it again." I would now like to finish with a quote from the revered Swami Vivekananda. "Music is the highest art, and to those who understand, is the highest worship." It's very inspirational. Thank you very much. I hope this presentation has given you some food for thought or better yet, food for imagination. My sincere thanks to the TEDx team who invited me and inspired me to give this presentation. I hope to see you all again in the future. Bye for now.